Despite the growth of the modern world and the trillions of pounds, dollars or yen being made and spent, at least 80% of the population survive on less than £7.23 per day. Yet, the USA has just announced that there are now 1 million millionaires in the country and 45.2% of global wealth is shared amongst 0.7% of the world's population. 22,000 children die each day as a result of poverty. According to the 2016 World Hunger and Poverty Facts and Statistics, 1 in 9 people suffers from chronic undernourishment. And now we're going to head over to Emu, our correspondent.
Thanks, Stan. A developed country has a highly developed economy and a technological infrastructure. The criteria used to measure the amount of development is to look at the GDP. This is a level of industrialization, also the amount of infrastructure and the standard of living in the country.
A developing country is a nation or a sovereign state that has low levels of industry and a low Human Development Index, HDI, compared to other countries. There are reference points such as a nation's GDP compared with other nations.
The life expectancy in the UK is 81 years old, in Angola it is 52 years old. In comparison, Central African Republic is only 45 years old.
Developed countries include UK, US, Japan, Germany, and France.
Whereas, Mauritius, Jamaica, Turkey, Costa Rica and South Africa are developing. What else links countries that are developed and that are developing? The answer is imports and exports. This is based on goods and services that countries have available to export and goods and services that they can afford to import. Examples include
US
$2.2 trillion in exports and $2.7 trillion in imports of both goods and services. China $2 trillion in exports and $1.5 trillion in imports of both goods and services.
In comparison to
Mauritius, $4.3 billion in exports and $2.8 million imports of both goods and services. Jamaica, $3.7 billion in exports and $1.7 million imports of both goods and services.
The biggest factor in differences in the climate above, northern, and below, southern, the equator is the distribution of land and ocean. The northern hemisphere has more of Earth's land mass, and the southern hemisphere has a more ocean. The climate in the southern hemisphere resulted in extreme weather. This can include torrential rainfall and drought. This makes it very difficult to keep livestock and to grow crops.
In the northern hemisphere, the climate allows for the more effective use of the land, arable, pastoral, and mixed farming can take place. This means that these countries can produce enough food to feed their own population and to export excess to countries abroad.
People think fair trade and empowerment. We have more premiums, and we are able to do more projects. We are able to reach the community.
If fair trade is so successful, why is there a need for international aid?
There are three main types of aid. They include short-term, conditional, and long-term aid.
Aid helps rebuild lives and housing after a disaster. Projects that develop clean water can lead to improved health and living standards.
Aid often increases the dependency of countries. Sometimes aid is not a gift, but a loan, and that means poor countries struggle to repay it.
This leads to economic interdependence. This creates a relationship between two or more regions and nations, in which are dependent on the other for goods and services. This results in unfair trading, as where there is a need any price can be asked.
Interdependence includes the giving of resources, knowledge, goods and labor between, for example, US, UK, China and South Africa.
But we have developed a friendship, I can see that. And I think long term, we're going to have a very, very great relationship.
Were made
In China, 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 China.
were made
In, let's say, China.
Interdependence can reduce international conflict and the risk of war as countries cannot afford to disrupt international trade.
So why, if there is so much money being made through trade, is almost every country in the world in debt?
International debt is part of the debt held by creditors in foreign countries. Greece and Portugal have large amounts of debt as they have borrowed more than they can afford to pay back. This impacts on the long-term economic growth, business activity and foreign investment within those countries.
In basic terms, this means countries borrow more than they can afford to pay back, sometimes the end so much the economy can crash.
تربیه می که کتابمون کم بود است دیگه تشکیل معلم کم پیدا میشه معلممون کمتر پیدا میشه در بخش همین کتاب و معلم مکتبمون جور نشده مکتبمون وضعش دیگه وضع مکتبمون خوب نیست دیگه توفرم خراب باید جور شد.
There's a learning crisis in developing countries where children are either poorly educated or denied an education altogether. Some countries invest more in their armed forces than they do in their classrooms, even though additional schooling can lead to higher incomes, benefiting the child and the overall economy. Education is a fundamental human right and is the best tool for tackling poverty and other issues.
که من مکتب نمیخواندم که علم نمیخواندم مثل یک انسانی کور بودم یه چیزی را از هم خوب بعد از هم فرق کردن نمیتونستم علم است که ما را از تاریکی به روشنی انتقال میدهد.
So Stan, what have we learned? We have learned about the key differences between developed and developing countries, focusing on living standards, imports and exports and industry, GDP. We have also looked at the importance of the positioning of continents and the impact that this has on climate. We now understand about fair trade, the pros and cons, and how international aid can support and affect people living in poor conditions. This report concludes that education is the best hope for developing countries. This has been Jenna and Alice, for BBC News. Back to you, Stan, in Newcastle.
Thank you. This has been an international broadcast from all around the world. We hope this has been A-star quality. From all of us here at BBC, good morning, evening and night. Until next time. Stan.